Is there a more famous couple than Bonnie and Clyde? Maybe fictional characters Romeo and Juliet? Biblical characters Samson and Delilah? Cleopatra and Mark Antony? Well, the Great Depression era in the US was rough times. Banks taking away farms, families literally selling their children into bondage to survive, long lines at soup kitchens, and crime. There was a lot of suffering and a great deal of resentment by the average citizen toward those they believed were causing the issues, those that were doing well, like banks and bankers. On the one hand, people were supportive of lawmen who tried to rein in the crime, and on the other, they were resentful of the lawmen who were perceived to protect the wealthy while focusing on the poor and disadvantaged for arrest. Bonnie and Clyde became a sort of entertainment in that era, in that context. They represented what the average person, barely able to survive, wouldn't have done but wanted to do, take down the banks and evade the law. They were free and ballsy like Romeo and Juliet for the days of the Dust Bowl. Much of the American public followed them obsessively, cheering on each escape, each robbery, each near brush with the lawmen who wanted to catch them. They flew in the face of authority who hadn't really helped the American people out of the Depression, or that was the perception, and gave them a metaphoric a middle finger many citizens enjoyed. They would maintain that public support and fascination for quite a while before the tide eventually turned. Despite the many, many movie depictions of them, Bonnie and Clyde were pretty close in age, Barrow being only about 19 months older than Parker. Bonnie was born just before World War I in a small town called Rowena in Texas. She lived with her mother, two siblings, and her grandparents in a suburb of Dallas after her father died. She dropped out of high school and got married when she was just 15, and the marriage didn't last long, but that couple never did divorce. Bonnie was separated and living with her mom in Dallas, working as a waitress when she met Clyde. Now, Clyde was born in 1909 into a family of farmers who were quite poor. The family would move to a very poor part of Dallas while he was still young. They lived under a wagon when they first moved there, an indication of just how poor they were and just how bad the economy was doing. He and his brother Buck got into petty crime at first and then into stealing cars. Barrow was sent off to a prison farm in 1930 and Bonnie helped him escape. They weren't great at fleeing the law then, though, and Barrow was picked up pretty quick and returned. He was sexually abused in prison and would kill his abuser. He didn't want to work the prison fields, though, and so had two of his toes removed. Did he do it? Did he have another inmate do it? We don't know. But we know he walked with a limp after that, right up to his death. Those who knew him would say that time in prison changed him. He was an angry, bitter man when he was paroled. It's widely believed that Barrow would do all the things he did after that prison sentence out of anger for what happened to him and in revenge. Parker, however, was in love with Barrow and was willing to follow him and do whatever it took. She was loyal to Barrow until their end. Barrow, Parker, and a man named Ralph Fultz begin robbing stores and gas stations. They're arrested after a botched robbery on a hardware store, and all of them do time. Parker starts writing poetry to pass the time. Parker and Barrow reunite when they're released, and Fultz goes on his own way. They're involved in one robbery of a store where the owner, J.N. Booker, was shot and killed. So then we get to August the 5th, 1932. Barrow and two men, Raymond Hamilton and Ross Dyer, were drinking at a dance in Oklahoma. A sheriff and a deputy approach them in the parking lot, and Barrow and Hamilton shoot at the cops, killing Deputy Moore and wounding the sheriff. This is the first lawman that they killed, and after that they escaped back to Texas. Parker and Barrow were joined by W.D. Jones, who was a 16-year-old while they were in Dallas. On Christmas Day, 1932, they stole a car in Temple, Texas, killing the young man who owned it. Then, a bit more than a week later, they killed a second law officer when they accidentally walked into a trap set for a completely different criminal. That made 5 killings since Barrow was released from prison in Oklahoma and in Texas. A little later that year, the gang of 3 were joined by Barrow's brother Buck, who was just released from prison, and Buck's wife Blanche, and they were in Joplin, Mississippi when they reunited. The little gang they were having loud card games, drinking a lot, generally being annoying to their neighbors, who then complained to the Joplin PD. So, police thought the group must be bootleggers. That was super common in the days of the Depression era and the days of Prohibition. So they put together a small posse of officers to confront them. They had no idea what they were walking into, though. The Barrows and Jones opened fire on the cops, killing a detective and wounding a constable who later died of his wounds. So the group manages to escape with minor injuries. Most of their stuff was left back at that Joplin apartment, though, including a cache of weapons they had been stockpiling, papers that identified them, and a camera with undeveloped rolls of film. Some of the most famous pictures of the Barrow gang come from the Joplin police after they developed all that film. They also published some of Parker's poetry, which was left behind at that house. And America ate it up. They ate it up, and rumors about the gang began to spin wildly. The press would often hint at things like illicit sex, which only stirred additional public interest. Well, and it also sold newspapers. After leaving Joplin, the group traveled between Texas, Minnesota, Indiana, and Louisiana. They kidnapped folks to steal cars, and there are further bank and store robberies, and they typically let their hostages go far from home, but with some money to help them on their way back. And these escapades make even more headlines and bring them even more public support. But eventually, as the Barrow gang killed more and more people, well, the tide of public opinion began to turn against them. Being notorious made it harder for the group to hide. They never knew at a restaurant or a hotel or a gas station who might recognize and report them. So they started camping, and the pressure started infighting between the group. At one point, Jones took their stolen car and just drove away from the group, stranding them. Then there was a car accident when Barrow drove straight onto a bridge that was still under construction. Parker was severely burned in that accident, burned so bad that the gang was worried that she was not going to survive. So they steal another vehicle in Oklahoma, and they make their way to Arkansas, where they hole up for a time and try to nurse Parker's burns. Then they murdered the town marshal and had to flee again, with Bonnie severely injured or not. They end up in Platte City, Missouri, where they rent a couple of brick cabins and attract way too much attention. The landowner tells local cops about the group. When they went into town to buy food and medicine, the pharmacist also reported the group to police. The local sheriff, suspecting that it was the Barrow gang, given the nature of the reports, well, he calls for backup from Kansas City. Together, they raid the cabins at about 11 p.m. one night, and somehow, in the midst of this shootout, they escape again. This time, though, Buck has been shot in the head, and Blanche has glass in her eyes, and she's basically blinded. They head off to Iowa, while the lawmen in Missouri are left confounded at what the hell happened. Where'd they go? The gang camps out at an abandoned amusement park. Buck was in very bad condition, but he was able to sometimes talk and sometimes eat. All those injuries, though, and bloodied up bandages, well, they caught the attention of the local residents, and soon they were reported again. The law understood they were dealing with the Barrow gang, and law enforcement surrounds the group, along with a whole load of curious residents who come out to watch the show. Somehow again, Barrow, Parker, and Jones escape on foot. Buck was shot in the back, though, and poor and near-blinded Blanche was also captured. They brought Buck to a hospital, but he wouldn't survive his condition and died in Perry, Iowa. Blanche was interrogated and sat in a prison cell. For the rest of the summer, the remaining gang members traveled through Colorado, Minnesota, Mississippi, trying to restock their weapons and ammo, and committing robberies as they went until they ended up back in Dallas. Now, Jones would leave them there and go to Houston to visit his mother, where he was captured and confessed just about all the gang had ever done. Barrow and Parker were in Dallas, trying to deal with Parker's injuries still. Barrow committed a couple of robberies there with some local help. They were then almost caught near Sowers, Texas, but managed to escape. Both Parker and Barrow had been shot, though, in the legs. In the meantime, thanks to Jones's confession, a murder warrant goes out in Texas for the criminal couple. Barrow, though, has plans. Now, he goes back to that first prison farm, Eastham, and he raids the place, breaking out a number of inmates, including Raymond Hamilton, the man who shot and killed that first lawman with Barrow back in Oklahoma, Joe Palmer, and Henry Methvin. Barrow was happy to embarrass the Texas correctional authorities, but then again, the attack on a prison and the mass escape pissed off authorities all over Texas, and the federal government as well, who had already just about had it with the bank robberies. Now, there's a massive hunt for the gang. A retired Texas Ranger who had 53 kills of criminals on his record, a man who had been wounded 17 times during his career, he is put to the task of hunting the Barrow gang, and he would. He would stick to them like white on rice. Just behind them, every step they took from that prison escape until their last days. Stupidly, they killed 2 more officers on Easter Sunday near South Lake, Texas. The story of the killings is exaggerated and retold until it became propaganda that firmly turned the public against the gang. Makes them entirely fearful of the gang, makes the public okay with the killing of a woman, which they did resist back then, and make them more likely to report any and all sightings of the group. Parker was no longer a love-struck young woman following Barrow. She was a killer in the public's eyes. Not that the public should have had sympathy for the Barrow gang, but they were being lied to nonetheless. Instead of a public demanding their capture, they now had a public demanding their slaughter. The Barrow gang didn't help themselves any by continuing to kill either. A senior constable, 60, was killed in Oklahoma, and then a police chief was kidnapped, taken to Kansas, and released with a message meant to turn some of the propaganda around. Parker doesn't smoke cigars, he's told. He's told to go back there and tell the media that before being given a clean shirt and some money to get back. Now, this Ranger Hamer was a pretty smart man, and he figured out how best to track the gang and that they were skirting the borders of the Midwestern states, kind of exploiting a law that stopped law enforcement from one state pursuing criminals into the next state. But they were also consistently moving in a kind of circle, and Hamer was able to accurately predict where they would turn up next. They had a pattern of family visits, making them much more predictable. And they were set to visit Methvin's family. Now, in Louisiana, Methvin had actually become separated from the gang near Shreveport. The posse caught him, and he helped them set up the rest of the gang. He set up his car on the side of a road, making it look like he had engine trouble. 6 posse members hid up in the bushes near Methvin's vehicle, and they waited a day and a half, or maybe it was 2 days. Barrow's car eventually comes along, and they slow down for Methvin. The posse begins shooting at it before it was even stopped. Barrow was shot in the head. Parker began screaming. 130 rounds were shot at the car. I counted 112 bullet holes in the car when it was over. Each of Parker and Barrow had more than 28 bullet wounds. They found another arsenal in the car and 15 license plates from different states. 10,000 people descended on the tiny town of Arcadia, Louisiana, trying to capture glimpses of the pair, trying to be the first to get photos, the first to get the story. The whole Bonnie and Clyde Barrow gang thing would change all manner of laws, making kidnapping and bank robbery both federal offenses. Two-way radios were installed in police cars. Local authorities began to coordinate with one another and with the FBI. After Bonnie and Clyde died on the side of that road, one after another, the infamous criminals of the day would fall. from John Dillinger to Pretty Boy Floyd to Babyface Nelson. In the end, the Barrow gang killed a dozen people, and 9 of them were police officers in a spree that lasted just a little more than 2 years. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.